This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my intuitive eating online course and community. If you're ready to leave diet culture behind and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, offering online courses and programs to help people all over the world make peace with food. Join me here every week as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food and their bodies.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world. Try and sink my teeth in.
Hey there, welcome to episode 157 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with fellow anti-diet dietitian Fiona Willer all about why we need to be critical of the vast majority of weight research, how the health at every size paradigm can go viral, why weight-inclusive work is such a life-saving endeavor, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment, but first I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener named Carly, who writes, I'm studying abroad in Spain right now and having a really hard time with the huge difference in food schedule. I'm trying to let go and just follow along with the culture so that I can get the most authentic experience, but I'm finding myself thinking about food constantly. I haven't mastered when to eat, and so I'm extremely hungry at different points in the day, and so it feels like I'm restricting again. People here eat more snacks in between their meals, and I've been feeling stressed out about having to make so many choices about food. I've been reverting to pre-planning meals so that I don't feel overwhelmed, but that's just making me think about food all the time. How can I stop thinking so much about food and let myself just experience and live in the culture? So thanks, Carly, for that great question. And before I answer, just my standard disclaimer that these answers are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. So yeah, this is a great question. And I think that's a very common experience when you're in a new culture. And I will say that in general, you really don't have to do what people do in that culture when it comes to food, especially when you've struggled in your own relationship with food. It would probably be different if you were raised in Spain and had learned the cultural eating patterns from a young age. But if it's causing a huge amount of stress to try to learn it as an adult and you're already struggling in your relationship with food, then I really wouldn't want you to put pressure on yourself to conform to the culture in that way. And really, you always have permission to eat in a way that works for you, no matter where in the world you are and no matter what the culture around you is doing. So that goes for American culture or whatever your home culture is just as much as it goes for Spanish culture. All of that said, though, I want to dig a little deeper into why you're getting so hungry and feeling like you're restricting. Because a culture that builds snacks into the day is a really lovely thing, I think, in terms of making sure that you're not extremely hungry. And so that really reflects the body's natural rhythms of needing something to eat every few hours, which is what we intuitively need. It's what our bodies crave and want. So it sounds like the culture is built around those natural rhythms, but it sounds like you're so stressed out about making the snack choices that maybe you're just choosing to have nothing and going hungry because it stresses you out too much to think about food, or maybe you're choosing something that seems quote unquote safe but isn't actually satisfying. In general, I would say if you're thinking about food constantly, it usually means you're not getting enough of it and your body is feeling deprived. Unless, of course, your job requires you to think about food all the time. But even then, as we've discussed on the podcast, you could also be restricting and depriving yourself because rates of disordered eating are quite high in the food industry and among nutrition and dietetics professionals, which makes total sense because so many of us are drawn to these fields because of our own issues with food. So all of that is to say, even if you are thinking about food all the time for a good reason, you might still also be restricting and deprived of food in general. But for most of us who are not in jobs where we're required to think about food 24/7, it's a good sign that if you're thinking about food constantly, you're probably not getting enough, whether that's enough food overall, enough variety, enough food at particular times of the day. And so listen to that. That's your intuition and your body telling you that you need more food, that you need more nourishment. So it sounds like you probably are restricting to some degree and that you need to eat more. And I would say allow yourself to eat when you're hungry rather than trying to fit in with what seems like the cultural norm, what it seems like other people are doing, maybe your Spanish friends. You have a different body chemistry than anyone else. Only you know your body's rhythms, and you need to address those. You need to take care of your own needs, even if everyone else around you is doing something different. So that might mean carrying snacks in your bag and having them between classes or whenever hunger strikes, and maybe having some snacks in your room if you're living with a host family. I'm not sure. If you have a dorm, it might be a little easier if you have a fridge of your own and stuff like that. But if you're with a host family, you might need to have just snacks in your room to tide you over, especially if you're eating dinner late or lunches or meals late in general, which I know is common in Spain and many other countries for that matter, or even cities. Like in New York, where I live, we tend to eat dinner pretty late as well. So I generally have a snack in the late afternoon or early evening to tide me over until dinner. And then the other piece of this is, I don't know if you were still jet lagged when you asked this question, but that can definitely contribute to feeling out of sync with the eating rhythms of a new place. It can take several days and sometimes even up to a week for your body to get used to the new time zone, especially if you're coming from really far away. Like I studied abroad in Paris my junior year of college, and I was coming all the way from California, which is where I went to school. So that was like a 6-hour difference. And it totally threw me for a while. So if you're struggling with some jet lag, just have compassion for yourself and do the best you can to eat with folks when they're eating, but also have plenty of snacks so that you can eat when you're hungry. And again, it's great that this culture really sort of sanctions snacking. Speaking of which, I remember in Paris, the culture was actually not to snack as much and to have bigger meals and maybe some candy or something in between, but not as many substantial snacks. And that wasn't something that I was used to because I was an intuitive eater when I went to Paris when I was 20, and my body generally asked for more substantial snacks throughout the day. So I was sort of like, not comfortable with the way that people were eating there. And I remember getting teased by my French friends for how much I snacked. And that sent me down this rabbit hole of trying to snack less, which combined with the fact that I had gained some weight on a new birth control pill, and that led me down a path to disordered eating very, very quickly. And if I could go back and tell my 20-year-old self anything, it would be, don't listen to those folks. You know, they don't know your body and your needs, and you don't need to change your eating habits to please anyone, and you definitely don't need to try to lose weight because no one does, no matter their size, and pursuing weight loss will only lead to pain in the end. So obviously, I wasn't able to tell myself that at the time, but now I can tell that to Carly and to everyone listening to maybe help save you from that pain. So one more time for the people in the back, you don't need to change your eating habits to please anyone, and you definitely don't need to try to lose weight because no one does, no matter their size, and pursuing weight loss will only end in pain. So I hope that helps, and Carly, I hope you can start to feel more secure with food and have a great rest of your experience abroad. And if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions to ask your question today. And then if you want a whole library of answers from me to help you master intuitive eating, plus the chance to have me answer any question you want and get a wealth of individual attention as well as other amazing content and support, come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. Maybe you've been listening to the podcast and loving the idea of intuitive eating and health at every size, but you aren't sure how to put it into practice in your own life. And this course is designed to help you do exactly that so that you can kick diet culture out of your head for good and free up time and space for all the things that are so much more important in life. The course gives you a ton of guidance and support in recognizing diet culture for the life thief that it is, including a private community where you can connect with hundreds of amazing people who are alongside you on this intuitive eating journey. If you're ready to become an intuitive eater and leave diet culture behind once and for all, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Fiona Willer. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Well, my relationship with food is funny because I actually don't remember too much about it until I started dieting. So before that time, I really have very little recollection of any foods that I liked or any rules around food or anything like that until I was about 9. Around that time, I became aware that my mother, her body shape was changing a lot, you know, like she'd be skinny and then she wouldn't be so skinny. And there was quite a bit of fluctuation around that time. But I myself I don't recall any body issues around that age. It was really only as I became a teenager that my body became an issue to me. But I mean, in retrospect, clearly that was because it was an offshoot of the issue that it was to my mum, because I was dragged to Weight Watchers in my early teens. Lost quite a bit of weight with that, you know, diligent, good girl, doing all the things I was supposed to do. So from that time, I became more aware of food, and I can see again in retrospect, like looking back at the types of food we ate, it was very 1980s diet food. So no dressings on any salad. Everything came sort of separate. There's not a lot of mixed meals. When I went to learn about dietetics, study dietetics, I realised that actually it did literally look just like a 1980s diet, the family food intake the whole time. And there was only really a reprieve when Mum was out for the night and Dad cooked sausages, which was the only thing that he knew how to cook. So it's funny what you remember.
I know. My dad did hot dogs, actually. That was like the only thing he knew how to cook. So, hot dogs and grilling was like his domain.
Yeah, exactly. Dad can use a fry pan. I know that. And the veggies were always, really, really well boiled veggies.
Oh, God.
So, and I have reflected on this before, and it feels, as a result of that, I don't have a love for cooking. You'd think actually that I might have developed, this new discovery about food, about all the amazing things that food can be, and channel that into skills base, but I actually haven't. I'm still actually not very into cooking. I'm into eating. I love it when somebody else cooks for me and has some skill around there. I love that.
Same.
But I myself find cooking quite a chore at the moment, but I have to feed lots of little humans too, which makes it less enjoyable.
Right. And probably less adventurous too. You can't do as many interesting things. You have to be concerned with managing their tastes or what they're going to accept.
It's always that balancing act between trying to do something interesting and exposing them to something new, which I really want to do, and yet recognizing that that's going to mean that they go to bed hungry and don't sleep as well. And so it's sort of, stabbing myself in the foot. Sometimes it's always that balancing act, but that will change as they get older. They're quite little. I've got 3 under 7, so we're right in the trenches of food refusals and weird things around food, developing tastes and stuff.
I bet they egg each other on too.
They're not too bad. They all recognise you can imagine they have been trained in division of responsibility style eating forever, so I don't ever force them to eat anything they don't want to, but they certainly need to keep it on their plates. And they're very good at the "no, I've had enough" line, which is totally fine, and I've got to respect that. But yeah, it's interesting, the politics of feeding a family when I'm not a pediatric dietitian, so I've only got the observations of my own family unit. And they're all very different styles of eaters.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it really is, I think, a different story when you're working with your own family versus when it's being a dietitian for other people's kids. It's a different thing.
Exactly.
It's interesting. So did you have any of that pickiness when you were growing up, or was it not so much?
No, my brother was branded as the picky eater. I don't know. I remember my mum washing the sauce off the apricot chicken for him, but these days he's not. So I don't know how much of that was sort of family narrative and how much of that was proper narrowly selective eating. But anyway, so no, he was the picky one in the family. I was sort of painted more of the "we'll eat anything, don't worry about her, she'll get herself sorted out."
Right, the good girl.
As my body got a bit larger, that sort of narrative became more entrenched in the family, which was, utterly useful for me, not.
I bet, yeah. How did that play out? Like, how did the commentary about your body start, and what did it do to your relationship with food?
Oh, because of being dragged to Weight Watchers at 13, I say dragged. I mean, clearly I didn't ask to go to Weight Watchers, but once I was there, I did swallow all of the rhetoric completely. So then there was always this, you can't actually trust your body to tell you what to eat. You've got to eat out of a little booklet. You've got to check off the things. This was right in the era where they had like 5 serves of this sort of food, and you check them off in the little handbook things. So anything other than that, I guess I started perceiving as being not a good thing, I guess, that this was the way you're supposed to eat, and anything outside of that was not good. And certainly that was the sort of talk that we had in the household as well. If it wasn't on plan, then it was bad and gluttonous and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's very damaging.
It is hideous, really.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any medical issues around my weight. I was just higher. I was a higher weight than I think my mother thought I was supposed to be. So that was interesting.
Really? So her body image, it sounds like body image concerns got translated onto you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I did absolutely internalize them as well, because then I remember, all the way through my adolescence, the body checking and my self-concept, I didn't think I was as valuable as the other girls because of my body shape, and less romantic potential, all the things that break my heart now to think of other kids going through.
Yeah. So it really sounds like you internalized it and kind of curtailed your own enjoyment of life because of it.
Yes. Well, it did make me escape into my head, which I do appreciate now, because I do spend a lot of time in my head now doing the stuff that I do. So, I guess it was training in that. It was training in seeing myself as I had to find another way to value myself. I guess that was my survival mode. So, in that way, now that I'm out the other end of it, I wouldn't be the person today that I am without having had that history, but I don't want anyone else to have it. I want them to have a fulfilling life that doesn't have to be healing their own younger life,
I totally agree. I feel the exact same way. I've been thinking about my own history and what diet culture has taken from me, and, this metaphor of the life thief that I have. And I'm actually writing a book around that concept too. So
fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm exploring, all these ideas about, what the life thief steals from us, what diet culture steals from us. And it's really sad and sort of a mourning process to have to think about. It's not a memoir, but I'm still going into some of my own, experiences here and there. Yeah. And talking about other people's experiences and weaving in the science and all of that. But those little things that I touch into, I'm like, oh God, that's so sad. I was just writing a piece today about my career choice and how that was shaped by my relationship with food and diet culture. And it's really sad that I didn't have other opportunities available to me. I started as a journalist and I went back to school to become a dietitian, and, was very much in my specialty, even in journalism, was food and nutrition. And it was all about that, because of my obsession with food. And I'm like, what would I have been writing about? What would I have been, what other kinds of things would I have pursued if it wasn't for being so obsessed with food? Not that I don't love how things turned out now, and I'm grateful for the fact that I got to this place and I can make a career that sort of bridges my experience with my skills and talk to people and make a platform around hey, we don't need to do this, anymore. Nobody needs to do this, but it's still sad.
It is. And it does feel perverse to be grateful. But I am too, because, there's nothing quite like standing up in front of hundreds of your peers, health professional colleagues, and advocating for that person that you were when you were 13. It's so cathartic. But there isn't enough room on earth for all the people who were harmed in the way that I was at 13 to do that. And so they need to have fulfilling lives in all the other things that life has to offer.
Right. And I think it's there's only so many of us that have the privilege to be able to overcome it enough to make a career around helping other people heal. Right. And many folks go halfway there in terms of making a career around food and nutrition or something to do with diet culture, but get stuck there and it perpetuates the disorder, and it's
that's it.
Makes things worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. It's really sad. It's, I think that's exactly what I've devoted my career to, and sounds like you have too, is healing this wound that you had from diet culture and helping ensure that other people don't have to go down that road.
That's it. And I didn't even know it was a wound at the time. It did not feel like a wound until my eating disorder was diagnosed and recognised, and I could see all of the ways that I had self-censored my life because of it.
Wow. How did it morph from the Weight Watchers and the sort of low-grade dieting to an eating disorder?
Yeah, so I spent 4 or so years in the vegetarian world. I still have those tendencies, but I was quite strict at the time, and I got into reading, this was the 90s, got into reading all sorts of those early, I don't want to name them, but they're like quite popular, I suppose, sort of cleansing narratives, books. Cut out this food group, that food group, don't eat this with that, all of those things. So after, I have been to uni, I've been to uni many times, but my first degree was in essentially sort of English communication media half, and the other half was anthropology and archaeology major. So it's an arts degree, quite wide, which means I'm an excellent person to talk to about paleo because I have the anthropological background as well as a dietetic now.
Oh, that's amazing. You can totally debunk it from many sides.
Oh, I love it. Smash it to pieces. But anyway, during that degree, that was my vegetarian and very restrictive eating phase, still in a larger body. But I was certainly one of those people who was using vegetarianism as a mask for dieting. That was the way that I got around feeling like I was on a diet all the time, yet I obviously still was. I studied I then went overseas for a few years, did the whole, Australians Australians of a certain sort of background tend to finish uni or finish school and then go and spend a couple of years in the UK and backpack around and then come back home. And so that is what I did. And when I came back home, I wanted to pursue nutrition because it was still on my mind a lot. And I had dieted the whole time I was in the UK, and certainly thinking about the sort of eating disorder symptoms that I had, the binge eating disorder was certainly present at that time. And of course I was away from my family. I had a friend network there, but they'd only known me that way, so it just existed. The eating disorder just existed alongside me at that time. Came home, studied to be a naturopath.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I got through 2 years of that. I aced anatomy and physiology, which I totally loved and still do. And they taught straight anatomy and physiology, which is great, not sort of the less evidence-based type. But then we got into units like iridology and other things. And it was when I got a high distinction for iridology via correspondence that I thought,
What is iridology? I've heard of that, but
so it's a alternative therapy. So it's not evidence-based. It's not even a therapy really. It's about looking into somebody's eyes and diagnosing. So the story goes, in somebody's iris patterns in certain places, there's an anatomy of an iris pattern and it corresponds with a place in the body, and you can see where there's been trauma in the body by looking at the iris.
It sounds like a sort of healthist wellness culture version of phrenology.
Yeah, right.
It's like totally not scientific.
Considering that your iris patterns are actually yours for life, right. You're not going to be able to tell whether you've got cancer in your ankle or what was the things that, like blockages in your gallbladder was a common one that you'd diagnose, in inverted commas, from looking at somebody's iris. Anyway, so I got a high distinction for an assignment that I had to do via correspondence for that. And I thought, this is pretty shady. And my dad's an academic. He's a mining engineer, academic type person. So science, but not humans. And anyway, so it was all sort of percolating in my brain that perhaps if I were to finish naturopathy, I would end up having to justify my existence forevermore against the more scientific disciplines. So in any case, by the end of sort of halfway through that degree, I realised I needed more money to finish it, which is another element of those alternative medicine courses. You don't need to have in Australia anyway, you don't need there's no prereqs to get in. You don't need to have hit a certain GPA to get into the course. You just do the subjects, pay per subject. And so I'd run out of money by that point and had a pretty hectic credit card debt. So I went to live in Japan and taught English in Japan for a while. And while I was there, which was great, I love Japan so much, it was a good place to make money at that time on earth. And while I was over there, I thought, screw it. I actually just need to go back to uni and do dietetics because I don't want to have to be justifying my existence forever. And of course, the irony is that I'm still justifying my existence as a dietitian because of the camp that I jumped from.
Right.
Microaggressions of being a dietitian today.
Yeah. That's so interesting, though, the cost element, too, because, that's one aspect of the sort of wellness culture that I think doesn't get talked about enough is, how changing a career like this because of your own issues with food and body stuff can actually cost you a lot of money and result in a lot of debt.
Yeah.
Nobody really talks about that,
Yeah, that's it. Debt I know well. Thankfully, it's a friend who's in the past now. But
yeah, so you're living on credit cards during that period, or?
Yeah. So this all happened before I was 25. So I went back to uni at 25-ish to do dietetics, still very disordered. And then somebody handed me a copy of Rick Hausman's If Not Dieting, Then What book. She was a third or fourth year student, which was the course that I was in was a 4-year honours degree, undergraduate degree. So I must have been in first or second year. And we knew each other through the Dietetics Students Association group. And anyway, so she handed me a copy and said, you need to read this. This is amazing. And I went, okay, I'll read it. And you can imagine the whole, I can, hear music, the transformation.
Mind blown, yeah.
And it was so good. And as with anything, it feels like it changes overnight, but it doesn't. There's a whole heap of work then to do, but that was really the penny drop moment. Got into a research study that was after uni finished. So finished uni, still quite disordered, bought a private practice at the same time as working in a hospital, and also midway through that first year got invited to start lecturing back at the uni that I had done my undergrad at. Because good girl, I'm a very good dietitian. Clearly that was recognised. And can't say no to anything, or couldn't at that point. But anyway, doing dietitianing and doing weight management dietetics with my private practice patients and, hospital cardiac rehab patients, all the things, all the usual traditional weight loss messages, but still with Rick's book in the back of my head and a growing interest in mindful eating. But at that point, I think I was still, the mindful eating for weight loss camp.
Mm-hmm. I spent some time in that camp myself.
Yep. I think we all have to, because it's harder to get it all. You sort of have to step. It's got to be stepped.
It's also interesting that I had a very similar experience with the book Intuitive Eating that I discovered while I was in grad school. Also very disordered when I was in grad school, but not as disordered as I had been before. So I felt like things were mostly okay. But then I discovered Intuitive Eating and I was like, same penny drop moment. And of course it was also so messy. It wasn't just everything changed after that. It was like a door was cracked open, that had been sealed shut. That's kind of but then I slowly started to pry open the door. And yet, when I first started working in dietetics, my early jobs were very much in the weight management camp and the anti-obesity. I worked in food policy and community nutrition and doing, anti-obesity education, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Not thinking, it started to dawn on me the people who are really my quote unquote good students in these groups are the ones that kind of freak me out because they're kind of doing similar things to what I would do in my most disordered days. And I could I was like, that's weird, but it took a while to then connect those dots fully. So
yeah, I think when I was in private practice, I had a private practice for 6 years. Obviously, by the end of that, I was totally hazy, but at the beginning, quite weight management-y. And it was the recognition that it was, people would lose weight a bit and then, not for want of trying, it would plateau, and then we'd have a plateau discussion and the, forensic examination.
How many raisins did you eat?
I know, right? These accusations.
Totally.
And, it's so hideous. Anyway,
no.
I remember from that whole, from the first couple of years of private practice, and I was doing it on a Thursday night, which is our late night shopping night in Australia. Thursday night and a Saturday was the clinic that I was doing. And I actually only had one client who she'd come in and she wasn't that far above what is, officially deemed the healthy weight range, just within a handful of kilos of that. She'd come in, she wasn't disordered at all. It was just one of those things. And I gave her the meal plan and did the things and and she lost the weight. And she was like, and I remember it was really one of the only situations where she had her last appointment and she was like, okay, we're done now. And I'm like, yes, we're done now. Okay. And she's off. I mean, I remember her really clearly. I remember her name, remember what she looks like, all the things. And this was 10 years ago. And it, got to reflecting back that's interesting how that was so memorable. So memorable because it's so unusual that someone would do the things, lose the weight, get to goal weight, shake hands and walk out the door, because it actually never happens. Statistically, the average client, that is not their experience. So it was so memorable because it was very unusual.
Because she was a unicorn, one of that elusive 5% or whatever.
She was a unicorn. I mean, knowing the research now, she was not disordered, nothing medically wrong with her, had never had an issue with her body image or anything like that, and was able to incorporate those messages without getting stuck in them. And we know from the research that that is actually what the unicorns look like. But at the time, anyway,
yeah,
interesting.
Well, and I also would wonder, like, with people like her, it's like, I talked to Glennis Oyston for the podcast, who was also a unicorn. She was on the National Weight Control Registry in the US. She did all the things, she like lost weight and kept it off for 16 years. But she said that it got harder and harder as she went along. Like it was, at first pretty easy. And then it was like, oh, I'm having to work ever harder as the years go by to maintain this weight loss. And so she got more and more and more restrictive. And it was like, it ended up in an eating disorder. It ended up in like her hair falling out and all this stuff. But it was, it was just to like hold on to this weight loss that had been so easily attained at first. But it's like down the line, we gotta look at, that's why like research that doesn't look at long-term outcomes for people, I think really misses the boat.
Yeah, I have no doubt that woman, my client 10 years ago, is back in a slightly larger body now, maybe a much larger body. But I certainly know that she probably did keep it off for long enough to be counted as a statistical unicorn in the studies. Yeah, but who knows? I mean, it's just hideous to think of the harm that, it's an uncomfortable reality that the people that I thought I was helping at that time, I may not have been.
Yeah, I feel the same. I really, if anyone out there is listening that, worked with me previously in my weight management days, I want to say I'm sorry, like that's
I too. I am sorry also.
Yeah. And we don't know what we don't know. I think that's the thing, as dietetics and health professionals and anyone listening who's a health professional too, who's like, oh crap, I do that. I think that's the moment of reckoning that we all have to go through in deciding to do the non-diet approach or the HAES approach, because we can't, I've said before on the podcast, like the default education for health professionals is diet culture. Like that's what we're thrown into. There's very few places, and I know you're doing some great stuff in Australia in terms of lecturing and teaching and also online, but like it's a handful of people that really get that HAES education from the start, It's an injection into a weight-centric course rather than being a weight-neutral course. Right.
Down here anyway.
Yeah, it's not like it's built from the ground up to be weight-neutral. It's, and here's this other thing. That's,
Yeah. Totally. I love the looks on the students' faces when I give them the let's talk about actually BMI.
Oh, yes.
Talk. And then they go, oh, last week we learned this and this and this and this. And I said, okay, that's fine. How do you feel about that now? And they're like, I said, okay, well, you need to go and shake down your lecturers and ask them to explain because you now know more about interpreting BMI charts potentially than they've realised. So you've got to ask the questions. Be the awkward student who makes the lecturer realise they need to learn more.
Yeah, that's so important. I love that. It is awkward, right, to be that person. It's like,
And as a lecturer, it is awkward to get those questions too. But good lecturers go, oh, okay, I do need to know about this, rather than dismissing it.
Totally. Yeah. And they'll say like, let me get back to you, or let me do some research, or I don't know, like how cool is it when a lecturer is able to say, I don't know?
Yeah. Oh, I have said that many times. Why don't you have a look and get back to me and we'll talk about it?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious then how that transition happened for you in your private practice, or where the switch started to flip with how you worked.
Yeah. Well, I recognised that I did have eating issues that were not helpful. And I actually think that part of it was because of the discomfort of living in a body that's not the stereotypical dietitian body. And so that sort of feeling like I needed to look the part to do the work was driving the eating disorder, and just feeling more and more uncomfortable with that reality. And so I saw an ad for a research study looking into mindfulness-based treatment for binge eating disorder, and it had the criteria for binge eating disorder on the ad. And because I'd been more and more interested in mindful eating, so my ears perked up then, and I read the description, I'm like, oh shit, that's me. So I enrolled in the study, had the entrance interview. The psychologist said, yeah, well, you certainly meet the criteria. And I said, great. Hello, new identity. And went into this research. So it was a group-based mindfulness practice, not specifically thankfully, not specifically like mindfulness for not eating, because that's very big out there now, but it wasn't. It was learn mindfulness and we'll see what the accidental outcomes on binge eating behaviour are sort of study. So it was really a perfect study for me at that time, perfect treatment for me at that time to go into. And so that my mindfulness practice really helped with all the things, all the mental things and all of the physical connection things. And I really credit it to being, how robust I am now in terms of being recovered. So yeah, there was that. And then I, when you lecture at university, you can't walk down a corridor and say hello to anyone without them going, so you ready to do your PhD yet? What are you going to do? You want to work here more?
Get your PhD, right?
Yeah. So this is me, and by the time I was unit coordinating these huge units with hundreds of students in them, but all contract work, and so you can't here anyway. It's very difficult to get a permanent position without a PhD. And I love lecturing. I don't just love lecturing the HAES stuff. I really love lecturing nuts and bolts nutrition and across the lifespan nutrition. And I quite like lecturing things like epidemiology and nutrition policy and all of those things. Like I really love that world. I come from a long line of teachers and lecturers, so I don't know how much of it's genetic, but I certainly really enjoy that education element. And I even really like marking and all those other things people whinge about. I really like. Which is just weird. But anyway, that's me. And so I thought, yeah, I do actually want to do this. So my PhD started in 2012 and the topic was around health at every size and weight neutral stuff. It still is. I'm still going because I keep having children and
just slows the whole process down. Huh?
And getting overloaded and needing to take a bit of putting a pause on the PhD while I do the other things that have now become more important, at that time. But anyway, it'll be done by the end of next year because the money runs out. So it has to be done. So really starting then, that made me do the deep dive because I was very close to doing a PhD in irritable bowel syndrome and FODMAPs stuff.
That would have been so different.
I know, right? But I went with my heart, knowing that my supervisors were not HAES advocates and knowing that I would be doing new things at the university. So my university I'm doing my PhD through is the one that I studied at and lectured at. I have lectured at other unis now, but, it's my home uni and they're not HAESy. So I knew it would be an uphill battle, but it's been very good. I have really loved it.
That's great. So do you feel like you've been able to make some progress in getting your advisors to see things see the HAES message?
Yes. Well, my primary supervisor has gone on now to have, and who has now completed, another psychologist who did his PhD in diet versus non-diet It's a qualitative study. So, yeah, I have influenced them. But the main thing, like as a dietitian, to do HAES research in a dietetics department is very difficult because of the amount of ingrained weight centrism in those sorts of departments. So I think the key to my ability to do what I've done with my PhD is my primary supervisor is a psychologist. So my PhD is in the School of Psych and Counselling, and my secondary supervisors are dietitians in the School of Nutrition and Exercise Science. So because it's pan-disciplinary, I've actually been able to get away with things that I would not have been able to do if had it just been dietetics, because I use a lot of psychometric measures in my research. And the psychology part of it, usually studies done by psychologists in HAES don't have detailed dietetic element, because that's sort of it. So I feel really lucky that I can sort of straddle both of those silos, essentially. And that's really been how I've been able to do the things.
That's amazing. That's really awesome. And it sounds like you've kind of cobbled together something that works for what you need.
Yeah, I think everyone should have at least one, like non-psychologists should have at least one psychologist on their supervisory team. It's been excellent because he's so kind and helpful.
Yeah, it's probably like a little bit of counseling alongside the academic advising.
That's it, because I can go and go, oh my God, this sucks. And they'll go, let's talk about it. And I'll go, oh my God, you're great.
Yeah, you got to have that empathy.
Yeah.
What is the topic of your research? It's, generally HAES, but what's like your specific kind of angle?
Yeah, so the end sort of thesis is ending up looking like exposure to weight neutral ideas. So essentially health at every size, exposure and acceptance. So how much they have adopted a weight neutral stance, impacts on dietetic practice preference, impacts on self-compassion of the clinician, and in clients that it impacts on their dietary quality, their physical activity behaviours, and their internalised weight bias.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah, so looking at HAES exposure and adoption as the event that impacts upon all those other things.
Oh, that's so great. I mean, because that is really, it could provide such good evidence for exposure and like teaching dietitians about this stuff.
Yes.
If the outcomes that you find in practice end up being better.
Yeah, well, we know that it is viral and it's passed through social networks. So it follows the patterns that we see in the diffusion of innovations theory, which is, I don't know if you remember that, whether you did anything around that at uni.
It sounds familiar, but I don't know if that specific theory is what we learned.
Basically, with any new technology, any innovative practice, an idea or a thing, something, like originally it came through agricultural practices and the way that farmers would pick up new ways to do things on their farms. And it was first discussed in the 60s. It's a hugely well investigated social phenomena, essentially. And the population is broken into these early adopters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the innovators, early adopters, early and late majority, and then the laggards, who are the last people to adopt the new thing. And unfortunately, the laggards are the types of people who run dietetics programs and dietetics associations. And really, that segment has to be dragged in through policy change. But the rest, and HAES follows this pattern, is that it's passed through social networks. So you learn about this from your colleagues or your friends. You don't learn about it from your lecturers typically. And the benefits are communicated through those social networks and it spreads like a virus. So in that way, I've done other presentations where I've talked about HAES being like an iPhone, so it's a new thing. It's got different features from what you know. It does the things that you thought you were doing, but it actually does it better and comes along with a whole other skill set. So there are things that you need to know, which means that it is its own specialty area.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's good.
I love that.
It means we need to keep talking. It means talk to everyone, anyone, the person in the line at the shops. Just get it out there because it is viral.
That's so interesting.
Got to be loud and proud. Yeah.
I mean, I have noticed, I've been doing the podcast for 5 years, like recording it for 5 years. It's been out for like 4 3/4 or something. But in that time, and, I adopted HAES also sort of virally. It was from going to conferences and hearing colleagues present at eating disorder conferences and stuff. And I found that in the time that I've been talking about HAES on the podcast, I feel like I'm just seeing it everywhere now. And of course, I'm also looking for it more, but like, I think it's objectively is just popping up more and more. And I'm also meeting a lot of people that found out about it through me and then went on to do cool things in their career. Things. And it's like, it's so exciting, to see this sort of network transmission effect.
Yeah, it's a great time to be this sort of communicator at this time in history, and it will only benefit the more that we can rattle down our colleagues. So unfortunately, like, we're in the positions of privilege where we can have more influence than the people who will benefit the most can have, But we have to shout and raise those other voices. And we are on the right side of history, basically. It's an incredibly exciting time to be alive. It's almost embarrassingly exciting to be part of this movement at this point in time right now. And hope that my kids and all the other kids, all the 13-year-olds just like me out there who are living now and in the future benefit from this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I hope that too. I really have so much hope, for this generation. I mean, there are those retrograde elements in our society, like you said, the laggards, the people who are like digging in their heels, which, we see in politics as well. Like there's been such a global shift toward like diversity and embracing equal rights for people of all identities and ethnicities and all of that. And then now we're seeing this backlash. This, the laggard kind of element just, clamping down and kicking and screaming.
We've got that here too.
But I feel like that can't last. Those are the screams of a dying generation.
Yeah, and if you I think we have protected the sorts of things that our parents told us about accepting people with differences when we were kids. We'll have protected, that's why it's only older people, I found, who are finding it difficult to accept diversity. I mean, I see it in my own family generationally. But anyone who's sort of 40 and under is pretty guaranteed to be more open-minded about things, and many people who are older, of course, as well. But I agree. I think it's only a matter of time before diversity is fully embraced, and I hope this backlash, there's a backlash against the backlash, because it works to help them too. It's just the most annoying.
I know. Yeah, it's like, well, it's really, I think the laggards, the dying breed of people who want to hold on, it's holding on to privilege and holding on to what they think is.
Yes, that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, like what they think is going to give them power, give them privilege, keep them money in their hands.
It's fear. The whole thing is fear.
It is.
Fear of loss, yeah.
And I think that's very evident in the dietetics and health profession in general when it comes to the so-called obesity, quote unquote, epidemic. It's like the feeling of, one of the big rhetorical points in the quote unquote war on obesity is like fat people are draining our tax dollars, basically, blaming everything on their body size. But that's patently untrue. Like there's good research showing that all the money that gets attributed to quote unquote obesity is actually very inflated, and that it's
there's so much theoretical money involved.
So much, right? It's like anything that a person in a larger body gets, any sort of disease, sort of, it's like, oh, blame that on their size. When like, are we doing that for thin people too? Because otherwise we're comparing apples and oranges here. Like that's not fair,
Exactly.
But I think these industries that stand to lose a lot, right? I think the thing is they do stand to lose a lot because it's like the diet economy is a $66 billion operation. Mm-hmm. And so there are people who are going to lose money, but there are also innovative people who are going to be just fine and sustain themselves and make money and maybe not hand over fist like these diet industry titans are doing. But there's people that if they think, I mean, I could have gone into a career in weight loss / weight management and sold cleanses online and been super rich or something, you know, but instead I did this and I'm still making a living. Like sometimes I worry about money, but I'm not hurting. And so I think that there's room for people to have careers and flourish under a different type of economy.
All the people putting effort into trying to make larger bodies smaller, if they put that effort and their brilliant design minds into helping diverse bodies become more able to experience the world, enhanced health, all the things that weight loss is sold as the solution to, with the bodies that they have now. I mean, there are a lot of bucks that could be made that way. So instead of designing a balloon that goes in a stomach, could they not design appliances to help people live fully actualized lives in the bodies that they have?
Yes. And redesigning spaces to make space for people. Like there's so much that needs to be done to create a size inclusive society and also to create, you know, health equity for people in larger bodies. Like why not create hospital beds that are larger or surgical equipment that can handle larger, you know, like, someone could make a nice living on that if they figured that out.
I've talked about this before, but other things in medicine, particularly that are hard, are hero makers. So we're now doing surgery on babies that are still in their mother's bodies. There is no question that is objectively hard and risky. We still do it because it's the right thing to do. And they're heroes that do that. And yet operating on a larger body is seen as too hard. And I think, guys, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
Hard is not something that you have decided is just too much to bear in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
2/3 of the population would see you as a heroine, by doing it, by focusing your brilliance in helping larger bodies not die so much. Just do it. Like there's actually no difference. The only difference is the social stigma.
Yeah.
Hard is not a reason to not do it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? It's the social stigma. It's two things could be equally hard, but it feels like because something has social stigma attached, maybe there's also less money in that, right? People aren't getting grants and research isn't being funded to do that sort of thing too, because it's like, oh, you know, what we really need to do is shrink these larger bodies, not try to accommodate them, right?
Still, I mean, at least there's money around. And so it wouldn't be too hard to, you know, you've got your grant and you got your grant to do a study with a control group and an intervention group. And why couldn't the control group receive weight neutral care enhanced while the intervention group doesn't? And the thing is that it will be self-evident, the benefits of weight neutral interventions. Like it's there, you know?
Yeah. And that's a great thought too, is like, why not have the default? Because, in a lot of studies too, the control group will be, okay, they get a low fat, low calorie diet or whatever. It's like it's still a diet. It's still within diet culture, but it's a certain type of diet that everyone agrees is kind of like the banal sort of not interesting diet or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the intervention group gets whatever sort of flashy new interesting diet that they want to test. But why wouldn't the control group be weight neutral care? Like that makes a lot more sense actually.
And the thing is that in all weight related studies, the control group is not actually a control group. They are actually free living humans doing something. And so when you read a paper with a control group in it, it's made out to be that control group is sort of like your lab rats who aren't getting anything, and as the neutral sort of group, but actually they are living, interacting with life. It's not a control group. There is really no such thing as a control group in a lifestyle or health behaviour intervention. You have to look at what they were doing, because it is literally the sum of the differences that you're looking at with the paper, not nothing versus something.
That is such a great point. That is so well said. Like and it's something that nobody talks about really, that like if people are looking, it's like, I hear people say, well, there's science, there's science on, XYZ diet. And it's like, but what quality is the science? What is the science actually measuring?
And science is a method. It's not like a fact book, you know. There's always detail, always detail. You need to be open to recognizing the nuance in all of it.
I mean, that's, I'm sure, something that you're probably looking at in your PhD program and that you talk about too on your website that I want to explore with you more, because you have this new platform. It's like this interactive multimedia extravaganza called Unpacking Weight Science. And so you do a lot of this, right?
I do, yeah. So this is it really started off basically a few years ago. I received a really negative letter after one of the workshops that I gave, mostly because a participant, so this was a dietitian's workshop, and came to me, it didn't have any return address. Like, okay, great. Yeah. It was 2 pages of harsh feedback. Basically saying, oh, yeah, but you can't say this, you can't say that. So there's a lot of sort of weight bias stuff in there. But the main thrust of the accusation was that I didn't know the science enough. And I thought, well, that's hard. That's hard to hear because I think that I do, but maybe I don't. And so that was really my big kick up the butt to really, really know it all. And not at all. When I say it all, I don't mean about the actual content of the research studies, although I have to know that obviously with my area, but really about the way that the methods that we use to do research and to do the statistical analysis and the way that we write it up and how all of that impacts. So whether we do a between group or within group analysis, all of that sort of stuff, I knew that I, from that moment on, needed to be watertight with my statistical knowledge and with my study design knowledge and all of those things. That was a few years ago now. So I have continued on that because I find it very satisfying to demolish weight-based science. And so again, it's like therapy, right? You know, you do the things that you find satisfying. And so I, for a long time, have used my Facebook page, which is called Health Not Diets, and my Twitter, which is Fiona Willer, to put this sort of stuff out, just testing it out. But then at the end of last year, I realised that, because I do online courses as well for dietitians, so all the workshops that I do are available in an online format because of demand, which is rad, and also because I can't help myself with the uni lecturing style of things. So I developed up Unpacking Weight Science, an online course, which is available now. And that basically goes through all the devil in the detail. So design, study design. I'll talk about weight bias and stigma and how it's impacting on scientific literature and thus impacting on everything, and how it's not only one directional. You've got the weight bias of the readers and the authors going on in this field. And I talk about, so HAES stuff is in there and the impact of health behaviours on those outcomes that we traditionally have attributed just to weight. Anyway, so that course I was up in sort of August, I think, last year, launched. But I felt like it wasn't enough. So I resuscitated my Instagram and decided, because everyone else is doing podcasts and I really like listening to them, and it's a really nice little learning opportunity. So I thought, okay, well, what I want to do is actually make it, again, educational, because, again, I cannot help myself. So it's an educational podcast. It's paid, but it's low cost because I want lots of people to do it. But for the $5 a month, you get 2 20 to 30-minute educational podcasts, all weight neutral stuff. So I've just done one on the history of the BMI and of growth charts and the figures, the people involved with marking those lines between normal and overweight and obese, and how they've shifted over time and all of that. So you get the podcasty bit, and then with that is supporting materials, including further reading, a self-test quiz. So people can use it, health professionals can use it as professional development activity. So it's at least an hour of professional development a month.
That's awesome.
And there is a book, but I haven't finished writing it yet, so that's not out. But if you subscribe to the Health Not Diets Digest, which is also on the Unpacking Weight Science website, you'll get notifications of when the book becomes available, which will be as soon as I possibly can.
That's so awesome. I love it because, I mean, science is political, you know, it's like people don't sort of recognize that enough. And I think that teaching, especially dietitians and health professionals who might not understand the nuances of all the weight stigma that goes into research and everything else that goes into creating weight science. Like, it's important to know that stuff so that we can be more critical consumers of scientific research.
That's it. I mean, we've been taught to hold up science as this immutable truth machine, but actually it's humans who are asking those questions. All the hypotheses, if they're coming from a weight-biased human, the questions that are asked are going to be weight-biased questions, already starting from the assumption that larger weight is not great. So, being able to see how that then has these trickle-on effects in the way that the papers are written, but also that you can see the devil in the detail by knowing what to look for in the study design and in the statistical tests that they've used, and how you can find a weight-neutral stance within those details if you know what to look for. So they're sort of proving all the weight-neutral stuff. I mean, we've got me and you and a whole heap of other people out there talking about this stuff all the time in public. But if we left weight-centric researchers and science and medicine to their own devices, they would get here. They would get to where we are eventually.
Right.
Because it's self-evident in their own research. They can see the poor success, inverted commas, rate of weight loss interventions. They can see that when you help somebody to move more, enjoy their life and accept themselves more, that there are good things that happen with that as outcomes. See that. That's in their own research. We don't need special research. We've got their research, which proves our point. So we've got to do what we do.
Yeah. And it's about like shifting the perspective too, right? Because I think, what you said about the questions being biased from the start is such a good point. If people's, if their research is showing like, well, actually weight inclusive interventions are helpful to people regardless of whether or not they lose weight, like, oh, they have lower blood pressure and they have better quality of life, all these different outcomes, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh, they didn't lose any weight, but look at these other outcomes of the intervention. Like, but if someone's got that bias going in, that's like, well, people in larger bodies can't be healthy. Losing weight is the most important thing. It's like they're probably not going to see those details, even if they're looking right at them.
Well, that's it. Most of us, when we initially get into sort of sciencey fields and we've got a research paper in front of us, we'll read the abstract, go, okay. And then we might read a bit of the intro, then get bored about a third of the way through. Might have a quick look at methods and the tables, look at the pretty things in there, and then we'll go straight to the conclusion.
Yes.
Because we can't be bothered reading the whole thing because it's very, it's dry. And so we'll read the conclusion, but the conclusion is the least trustworthy part of the whole thing because that's where the researchers get to go to town on their own biases, basically. Mm-hmm. Because they'll say, oh, yeah, we found this, but... And then they'll say where they want, that we're future directions. And the future directions, really, they show their hand there because they'll say, oh, our intervention found that there was no statistical difference between the lifestyle control and the intervention group. But future research should look into and then, just add in any more weight-centric intervention type.
Yes. So true.
So actually the conclusion is the least trustworthy bit. We need to not look at the conclusion and we need to look much more closely at the introductory part as a way of them showing what their frame is and then the methods and the results.
Mm-hmm. So well said. So important. I think that's, I'm guilty of that too.
Right. Me too.
Scanning to it's like, not that there's any moral implication to this, but we're busy, right? We all have, limited time and we want to just kind of see, okay, what are the conclusions they're drawing from this research? How are media going to frame this, whatever, know, and to really get into the meat of an article and look at the nitty gritty details. That's where we can actually debunk things and sort of unpack things. And so knowing how to do that is so important.
It is. And as someone who writes these things now, not that many of mine have been published yet, but I'm right in the trenches of doing the data collection and analysis and writing up and knowing the amount that is omitted, that has to be omitted when you're writing what has been months in the making into a 3,000 to 4,000 word article. There's all of that stuff is underneath every single research paper. So you need to read it closely if you're really going to get the meat out of it. Now, I'm not suggesting you read all of it, but just all the things all the time because we would have no time, including me. But knowing that the conclusions are not necessarily, you can't trust that the authors have got an objective frame. You have to recognise that they are humans too. And they're also writing, it's a form of persuasive writing because they have to get the thing published. So it's got to be a paper that the journal recognises would be of interest to their readers, which means it has to be persuasive and it has to be coherent. And it's supposed to be new stuff, new findings. So it's a form of expressive writing. So to recognise that is important too.
Yeah, that's such a good point because scientists are humans too. Like everybody doing this work is just a person, and with all their human biases and foibles and things that they want to get across. And I mean, I worked on a few research studies too. I was at the Department of Health in New York, just like very tangentially working on some evaluations and stuff of our programs. But like, I remember that process being there was so much back and forth with the journal editor. There was so much like, these little details having to get brought out, or like redoing the statistical analysis and being like, does this even make any sense to include? Or do we do something else? Like, it's just like so much human, decision making that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like Lego, you've got your data, which is just like a big bucket of Lego. Now, how am I going to put this together?
Right, in a way that's interesting, that's not a total mess.
How am I going to sort this Lego? What am I going to find? So the sorting of it, and then how am I going to put it together into a thing that I can sell to a journal? So many gate posts to scientific publishing, and it's not objective. There are only two to three other humans, or you've got your editor and then you've got two or three reviewers who may well be reviewing your article while their small children run around their feet and screaming at them. It's all very human, even though it doesn't look it.
Yeah, even though it gets this sort of imprimatur of like, this is science, this is the truth with a capital T. But it's like several people read this and wrote this and, made this happen. And then every newspaper in the world reports on it if it's a finding that's like, this food's going to kill you, or look, you can't be fat and fit. That was that whole terrible study that came out earlier, which I had a great time debunking by digging into the research too, digging into the science and being like, look, they left this out, they left this out, they left this out. Like, they can't make these claims. They can't draw these conclusions.
How about you measure cardiovascular fitness like fitness? If you're going to say fit.
Mm-hmm.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I wasn't even measuring the right thing. Some science is just so, it's like, and it's so maddening to see the way that the public and the media sort of jump on it, and then it scares people. And then I have people, I'm sure you have people too, like writing to you being like, what about this? What am I to do with this? How do I square this with my, HAES journey or my intuitive eating practice or whatever?
Yeah, it is interesting. It's maddening and interesting. But I mean, just the fact that we can sit back and be quite casual about that, belies the amount of pain and anguish that people in large bodies are experiencing because of this bias. We have to change things. I'm really glad that I'm trying to.
Yeah, and you're doing an amazing job. I feel like your work is making such a difference. I can see it in, the people in Australia that I know, and the people who've taken your online courses and stuff. I think you're really helping to change lives. So,
well, I couldn't do it alone. And it takes all of us to do it. We all have to shake down this weight centrism, as many voices as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, anyone listening who is a health professional, who is, a provider who wants to do this work, like, there's room for you. Come on in.
Yes.
We have to do this together. Because you're right. We have the privilege of having a conversation about this and being sort of academically removed from it or commenting on it like a journalist or whatever. But this is actual people's real lives, and real pain is caused by weight stigma.
Yeah.
And it has to end.
Yeah. And death.
Yeah.
Death. Taking parents from children and...
Yeah, weight stigma kills, literally.
It does. It's hideous.
Yeah. No, I think this movement is so important, and I'm really glad you're doing it. I'm really glad you have this resource.
You do.
Thank you. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm really excited about unpacking weight science because I think that is going to give health professionals the tools to help dismantle weight stigma in their own work and also in the institutions that they practice in.
Yeah.
Because I think knowing the science and being able to argue back, just like you said with your father, who's like a science guy, you know, where you were like, I was going to have to be like banging my head against the wall trying to argue my case or whatever. It's like when you know the evidence and when you have it airtight, like you can actually make some changes in institutions that are all about the science, because that is, like you said, the sort of laggard, you know, not the early adopters, but the institutions that are like only going to change if they see a huge preponderance of evidence. Well, we've got to amass that evidence.
We do. And the thing is that I mean, one opening line that I would love to use in a presentation one day, I haven't used it yet, it's sitting in my pocket, but it is, everything you know about weight is right, but not right enough. So it's not that the weight-related research is all wrong. It's that it's not a complete picture. And so that is also, I think, a really important way of opening those doors to the laggards, essentially. Because when you go in and say everything you know is everything you think is wrong, there's a lot of pushback, reactance that happens to the person receiving that message. But it's the, you know, everything you know actually isn't wrong. It's not enough. Look at this. Look at what's missing here, and look at what they found here. And that is actually in all of the studies, but they don't report that. And look at how we can do things differently now that we know that, you know, it's just, we now know this. We thought that, and it was really understandable that we did think that. It's really, you know, totally non-controversial to realise how we got to where we are now. But we now know better, and we do need to do things better and grow from knowing what we now know. And so using that is helpful.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's a more compassionate approach than just like smashing it to the ground and everything you thought you knew was wrong. Because it's true, like we have, I mean, weight science does show associations or correlations between higher weights and certain health conditions and stuff like that. But it's like the interpretation of why that is what's missing. That's the thing that we've gotten wrong. Like that's the thing that needs to change.
And the recognition that not all things are created equally. Like healthcare, if you're in a larger body, even in the same hospital with the same healthcare providers, is not the same. On paper, it will be treated as like a controlled variable. You're controlled for the hospital, but actually that experience of that human in a larger body going through that service is, for one condition, is very different from a smaller human going through that same service for that same condition because of weight stigma and bias and weight discrimination in those settings that is invisible in the epidemiological evidence anyway.
Yeah, weight stigma is that missing factor for so much. It's like you can't, if nobody's controlling for it or even attempting to control for it or describing it in their, you know, limitations of the study or whatever, then what good is the research? Like what good is any of that? We just know there's an association. To me, it's like the fact that all of us are steeped in diet culture is sort of where it begins. It's like, okay, let's look at what biases from diet culture this study or guideline or whatever sort of cultural artifact is showing.
That's it. There's so much that's uncertain. And, you know, that shouldn't make people run away. It should make people recognise the uncertainty and so not hold on to anything too tightly in all science and politics and everything. Black and white thinking is destructive in whatever field.
Absolutely. Yeah. So well said. Well, I could talk to you forever. I feel like there's like much more conversations to have here. So much fun having you. So tell us where people can find you and learn more about your work.
If you're looking for a sort of précis of my life, I do have FionaWiller.com, but the Unpacking Weight Science is on unpackingweightscience.com. So that's for the actual sort of training in how to dismantle weight-focused science and training in weight-neutral stuff. And then if you're looking for training in the non-diet approach, so I wrote a book a few years ago, which was the clinical application of the health at every size principles and weight-neutral practice into dietetic practice. and also then a follow-up book into psychology and counselling that I wrote with Louise Adams, who's a clinical psychologist here and an excellent human.
And a former podcast guest as well.
Right. She's so cool. I love her.
Cool.
She's one of my best friends also, but she wasn't before we wrote the book. So it's good. It's good that was how we formed our relationship. But anyway, so if you're looking for a sort of clinical practice training, then the website is healthnotdiets.com. But the broader stuff is Unpacking Weight Science. And they've all got links to each other. So if you hit on any of those, then you'll be right. And I'm also on Instagram as Fiona Willer, and on Facebook as Health Not Diets, and on Twitter as Fiona Willer.
Awesome. That's so great. We'll put all those links in the show notes so people can find you and learn more about your work. You're so awesome and doing such amazing things. So I want everybody to go check it out.
Thank you. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here too.
No troubles. Pleasure.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Fiona Willer for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message, because who doesn't, by sharing, reviewing, and of course subscribing on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. You can go to christyharrison.com/subscribe to see all the available platforms. If you're looking for some practical tips to get started on your own anti-diet journey, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, head over to christyharrison.com/157. That's christyharrison.com/157. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my Intuitive Eating online course and community. If you're ready to make peace with food, become an intuitive eater, and break free from diet culture once and for all, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. A big thanks to our editor and engineer, Mike Lalonde, and to my Food Psych Programs team, our community manager and content development associate, Ashley Saruya, our new administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcript assistant, Megan Saichi, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Meredith Noble, and the music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever